Resident Evil is definitely one of the most iconic franchises in all of video game history, but one of my most favorite additions to the Resident Evil franchise is their iconic characters. Also, back in September, I did a top 10 most iconic monsters of Resident Evil, and now I'm happy to say that I'm going to be breaking down the top 10 most iconic characters of Resident Evil. If you go on to agree with this list, then please drop a big like on this video, but if there's something you don't agree with, then please go down in the comments and let me know, as I will be replying to every single comment.
Officially, Lieutenant Billy Cohen is dead.
Rebecca, thank you.
Starting us off strong here in the number 10 spot is going to be none other than Rebecca Chambers, who made her debut in the Resident Evil franchise back in the very first game in 1996. I definitely could have put her lower on this list, but she doesn't make that many appearances throughout the entirety of Resident Evil, so I felt that it was only best to put her up here in the 10th spot because her not being in that many games makes her not that much iconic. But I will say that her appearing in the very first Resident Evil game and also the prequel of the very first Resident Evil game, which was RE0, makes her a very iconic character to say the least, and is a very fitting spot for her to at least make the top 10 in the most iconic characters.
So what's the first thing you want to do when we get out of here?
I want to see where you live.
Good. I take a shower.
Making her way into number 9 on this list is going to be none other than Sherry Birkin, who debuted in the original Resident Evil 2 in 1998. I know some people might not say that Sherry isn't an iconic character because she only appeared in RE2 and RE6, but I really like Sherry's character, and her reappearing in RE6 and being older I think really helped her be an iconic character in the future. Back in Resident Evil 2, Sherry didn't really serve much of a purpose besides needing help because of just being a little girl that couldn't defend herself. But then when you get to Resident Evil 6, she proves to herself that she can hang with the rest of the Resident Evil characters, and I think that really helps her when becoming a iconic character.
Come on! Next time, take the fucking hit!
Now, coming in at number 8 is going to be none other than Nemesis, who only appeared in Resident Evil 3, and also isn't exactly a protagonist and is actually more of a villain. But when it comes to top 10 most iconic characters, I think Nemesis definitely deserves a spot somewhere in this list just because of how much of a threat he served through the entirety of RE3, and just for the simple fact that he goes down as the best tyrant of all time. The entire playthrough of Resident Evil 3 was cut short when we got RE3 Remake, but I will say that I really liked all of the cutscenes that were put inside RE3 Remake because I like the whole connection that they show between Jill and Nemesis throughout the game and just their classic rivalry. But there's also so many different aspects of Resident Evil things where Nemesis has actually come into the storyline. So it just goes to show that even the creators of Resident Evil think to themselves that Nemesis is one of the most iconic characters of all time.
Jill!
You made it!
When I started making this top 10 list, I realized just how hard it was going to be to actually make this list just because of how many iconic characters are inside the Resident Evil franchise. But I knew Barry Burton had to make his way somewhere in this list, and I went ahead and put him in the number 7 spot because, of course, he is none other than the original STARS lineup. Unfortunately, we don't get to see much from Barry Burton besides, of course, the Resident Evil 1 OG and remakes, and also Revelations 2. But he also was a character that appeared in one of the Paul W.S. Anderson films, which was Resident Evil Retribution, and he ends up getting killed off in the actual movie. I thought that was a really odd and unique decision made by Paul W.S. Anderson, and I didn't exactly agree with it that much. But regardless of if Barry is still alive or not, he is still one of the most iconic characters.
So, what's become of the Amber?
Sorry, nothing yet. But my little helper, is creating quite the commotion.
Now making her way into number 6 on this top 10 most iconic characters is going to be none other than Ada Wong, who makes her debut in Resident Evil 2 1998, but she was also mentioned in the original 1996 Resident Evil 1. If I'm not mistaken, there is a portion of Resident Evil 1 where you get to use the computer in the lab, and it is none other than her boyfriend John's computer. And when you use it, the password for that computer is her wife's name, or at least girlfriend's name, Ada Wong, or Ada. So I of course think that Ada Wong is one of the most iconic characters, and I think Resident Evil had that in mind as well, because they didn't even have her in Resident Evil 1, but they had her mentioned, which goes to show that they already had the idea for the character Ada Wong before even making Resident Evil 2. She's definitely an iconic character, but if this was a list on my favorite characters, I would put her much lower on this list.
Hello?
Good to see you again, Claire. We've got unfinished business.
Now in the top 5 most iconic Resident Evil characters, we have Claire Redfield. Claire Redfield made her debut in the original RE2 in 1998, and she is also the sister of none other than Chris Redfield. When Resident Evil 2 was in the works, they actually had a completely different concept for what Claire Redfield was going to be, and it was actually going to be a character called Elza Walker instead. So originally, Chris was never going to have a sister, I believe, and we were going to have a whole different kind of character that was a motorcycle riding chick. The only element of Elza Walker that got carried over to Claire when they actually changed that concept in actual RE2 and not RE 1.5 was that Claire also had a motorcycle just like Elza Walker did. But Claire's went on to become one of the most iconic and best characters in the entire franchise, and she was one of those characters that almost never happened.
Oh, I almost forgot. It's a lockpick. You'd make better use of it.
Thanks. I may need it.
Number 4 for the most iconic characters is gonna be the Master of Unlocking, Jill Valentine. Jill Valentine can definitely go down as one of the most iconic characters of all time because she was one of the first playable characters in the original Resident Evil 1, and she's one of the very few Resident Evil characters that have went through a dramatic character change. I really liked the concept that Jill was turned evil in Resident Evil 5, and that was an idea that was also used in Paul W.S. Anderson's film. Of course, because Resident Evil 3, Jill Valentine was injected with the T-virus because of Nemesis, and then the vaccine given to her, I believe, causes her to have a slower aging rate. And the intense fighting ability and combat skills given to her when turning evil from Wesker all around makes her a completely crazy advanced character in Resident Evil now that we haven't gotten to see much of after Resident Evil 5 happened. So she's iconic, but she's been through some changes.
I'm sure you did what you could, Leon.
Leon S. Kennedy is going to be making his way into the top 3 spot of the most iconic characters in Resident Evil. Leon didn't appear in Resident Evil 1, and he wasn't mentioned in Resident Evil 1, and he didn't actually debut until RE2, but he went on to have so many other game titles in the Resident Evil franchise after RE2, and those games went on to make him such a popular character that I think it's safe to say that he is in the top 3 of the most iconic characters of all time. Resident Evil 4 was an all-around great game, and I think Leon was a great character to be given the main character role of that game, and I think that game alone is what helped him become such a popular and iconic character in the RE franchise. Resident Evil 4 catapulted Leon's character into becoming such a popular and iconic character that by the time we play RE6, he has already got that title of the beloved iconic character.
Becca! Don't move. You. I don't think you want to die just yet. I have something that's of some interest to you.
Albert Wesker is going to be making his way into number 2 on this top 10 most iconic characters list. Wesker has had a couple of handful of appearances throughout the Resident Evil franchise before finally being killed off in Resident Evil 5, in which since then we haven't seen him at all. But of course, in Resident Evil 1, he starts out as the captain of the STARS team, and he eventually goes evil and turns on his fellow STARS members, which goes into one of the best rivalries that we have ever gotten in the Resident Evil franchise, which is Wesker and Chris. I really wanted to include his father Spencer as one of the iconic characters in this top 10 list, but we didn't get to see much of him as a character, so I just left him out of this list. But I think he had a potential to be one of the most iconic characters as well, just because of the none other Spencer mansion that he created.
Chris, you're alive.
My words exactly. Where's Jill? Thought you were with her.
Yeah, I know. We got separated.
So, finally, in the number 1 spot as the most iconic character in the Resident Evil franchise is Chris Redfield. Chris, of course, is the first main playable character besides Jill Valentine in the original Resident Evil 1, and he is also went on to be in the most Resident Evil titles, I believe, out of any character. And if there was a list of most iconic rivalries, it would be without a doubt that Chris and Wesker's would be the first for most iconic rivalries, because they went at it back and forth throughout, of course, the ending stages of RE1, and throughout Code Veronica, and lastly in RE5. Chris Redfield has definitely been given the catchphrase the golden boy of the Resident Evil franchise, so I think it's without a doubt that even Capcom could agree that Resident Evil's most iconic character is Chris Redfield. But that has it for today with my top 10 most iconic Resident Evil characters, so please go down in the comments below and let me know if you agreed or disagreed with this top 10 list. Also, very special shout out to my one and only YouTube Pro member, Ico Pro Sam. I post Resident Evil content every day, so if you're an RE fan, then make sure you guys subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a single daily upload. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video tomorrow. Peace.